This is Agent M, back on duty for Section Q. In this tutorial you are going to learn how to color your line art in Photoshop. Come on and let's get some color into your life. This is the file we produced during the last tutorials from scan to line art. I didn't change so much. I deleted everything but my line art layer. It's still here, only the black lines on transparent background, and I locked it. This is important because I don't want to work on this line art layer anymore. And then I included a background. Background information is always good. In this case it is just white, but we will take care of it later. For the moment I'm also going to lock my background layer so that I can be sure that I'm not working on it. In a first step we are going to apply some basic colors, the so-called flats. It's like the underlying color structure of our illustration. In order to do so, I'm going to insert a new layer right here, and it should be placed between line art and background so that I have the background really in the back. That makes sense, right? And the line art covering over everything. This layer I'm going to rename to flats, because it's only going to be filled with very solid colors. So I think my frog is going to be green. I already decided on a green default color. That would be my flat, my basic color for the frog itself. Now I'm going to take the paint bucket tool, set to foreground color in normal mode, full opacity. But now it's important that you check on all layers. That means the information from all layers is been regarded while filling now on the flats layer. And this actually works fine if your line art is closed solidly. So I'm starting on the body, and there we are. It's filled with green as it's supposed to be. Then the forearm, and we have some toes left here, so that was really fast. Now for the webbed feet here, I'm going to change the color a bit. Bring my color picker up, and I think it should be probably a kind of lighter green here. So click, click, click. And then for the leg and the background, I'm going to apply a more darker flat tone of the green. So with my color picker I'm deciding on, it's probably too dark. This looks fine for me. So then we have already also in our basic color structure the dimension, or the 3 dimensions applied somehow. Now I'm going for the eyes, and I think they are going to have a kind of yellowish look. That would be probably too yellow, but that is fine. So that would be the base color for my eyes, and the reflections up there could be just filled with plain white. I'm going to apply this in a second. Foreground color set to white. So, all right. That means if I now set the background to be invisible, I still have all the color information on my frog. Let's take care of the background right away. So I'm returning to my white background, and because I'm going to work on that background layer now, I'm going to unlock it. Well, I'm locking the flats instead, so that I'm sure I'm not working on the flats layer. The background layer is clearly separated into 2 areas. by this stroke here. So the upper area is going to be my sky, and the lower area is going to resemble a grass-like surface, I think. I cannot use the paint bucket tool on this layer because, as you can see, there are gaps in the lines here. So if I would use the paint bucket tool, the color would just spread over the whole layer. And I don't want to close those gaps actually, because they are giving me a nice free hand draw kind of feeling here. So I'm going to use the selection tool, the rectangular marquee tool actually, to define the two areas here. So first I'm opening a selection here, and you can see that this is not according to the stroke, but I can make a small manipulation on the selection using the polygonal lasso tool, and then on subtract from selection I can just try to get to follow the stroke here, probably like that, and then down below here. Then I can subtract this area from the rectangular selection. So now on the background layer I have marked my grassy surface. Again, I'm going to pick some greenish color here. Sometimes it's good to shift to only web colors, because then you can kind of access a default color here, and then from this color to find the toning you like. So probably the hue you like, this one. And then I'm free to use the paint bucket tool here. So this would be my grass, and now if I'm going to invert the selection, select inverse, I've got the sky, and this is going to be filled with a gradient, and in such a way that I can actually decide on the direction of the light. So I make the sky a bit lighter here above in the upper left corner, and then a bit darker in the right lower corner. We have to use the gradient tool then to apply a gradient. The gradient tool is right in the same section as the paint bucket tool. Here it is, and as a default it will always take a gradient from foreground to background. So I can just change the gradient by applying some different foreground and background colors. It should be from a kind of light blue. Also here I'm shifting back to only web colors. So from a kind of light blue to a darker hue. Probably this one. So this would be my gradient, right? Looks fine. And I'm going to use the gradient tool like this, and voila, there I have a nice blue sky. And I can then later on my illustration already decide where to put lights and shadow. Going to deselect here. Can see that I need still to fill some of the background areas here. So what I'm actually going to do is to get rid of the flats here so that I can look through my drawing. Then again I'm switching to the paint bucket tool, and probably I should pick up the green color here, and then again the paint bucket tool, because I have an area here to be filled, here to be filled, finally there, and the last one here, and then I can turn on the flats again. Fine. And if you think this was fun, then be advised, we haven't even started yet. On the background layer I am placing a lock. The flat should also be locked, because now we are going to work on a more vivid expression of our illustration. We are going to include some lights and shadows. I'm used to work on the shadows first and apply the lights afterwards. To apply the shadows, you would insert a new layer on top of your flats. I'm going to call this shadows. Now, The speciality is that the shadows layer will operate in a different blend mode. All the other layers are set to normal. Now, if we would like to produce darker tonings of our base colors, we would set the shadows layer to multiply. So that's essential here. Now, everything we are going to draw on the shadows layer is multiplied with the color below, and that will eventually result in a darker toning. I will always start with the original colors of the flat. So now I'm switching to my graphic tablet, picking up the brush. To begin with, I would always take a airbrush. So I'm activating my brush here, and then I'm going to the tool presets. There is my airbrush soft round 50% flow, and well, I think I can change the size to something smaller here. Right. Now, if I don't want to kind of paint over the lines, I can always take my flats as a selection here. Just with the magic wand tool, I can select my flats, then return to the shadows, pick up the default color here, well, and then basically with your airbrush, just start painting. So light is coming from here, so that means I need to include some shadows on the opposite side. So there is already a small shadow effect. If the shadows are not strong enough, well, you can always even change to a darker version of the base color, and then they are probably getting a more vivid expression here, right? So it's getting a really tired one. And then I'm including shadows here and here, right? So, well, that is probably too much, because there I would apply the lights, right, above here. So I'm changing again to a bit lighter version here. Shadows I would have here. On the heel here. Probably a bit on the toes here. So, right. So you go ahead, and according to the general light direction, you would work on the shadows until you reached a satisfying result. So this is my preliminary final result on the shadows layer. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the lighter area of the frog. Now on top of my shadows layer, I'm going to insert another layer. Shadows is going to be locked for the moment, and this layer is called lights. So on the lights layer, I'm going to produce the reflections caused by the direction of the incoming light here. The trick now is that the lights layer is also operating in a different blend mode, and if you keep the previous tutorials in mind, then you know if I want to produce a lighter version of a base color, I will set the brush or even the whole layer to screen, which I'm going to do now. So that means on the lights layer, first of all, also I'm going to work with my default green color on the body. It's set to screen, so I'm shifting to my airbrush again. Probably I assign a bit more flow here for the moment to the airbrush. And then according to the light, I will lighten this frog a bit, right? So just here also probably muscular kind of settings here, and especially right here. So I need to collapse this, especially here on the leg. And don't be shy to use even harsher tones of the color up to white. Right? If you paint directly with white and an airbrush, you get really some reflection, but you have to apply this carefully, right? Eventually, you would also use some texture brushes. You have already a lot of texture brushes applied in Photoshop, which are able to kind of making structural changes to the frog texture. Right? And if you are not content with the result you see, you can always fine-tune the opacity of the lights layer so that it would fade nicely. And whatever you do, experiment a bit, and I'm going to work here on my lights layer in all quietness. Just finished the lights. Now, to create some extra tension in this illustration, I will include a layer on top of everything, and this layer will carry the real highlights of this illustration. So above my line art layer, I'm including another layer set to normal in the first place, and I call this highlights. Here I will include plain white reflection objects, for instance, especially in the eyeballs of the frog. I will make them as precise as possible, so I'm going to use the elliptical marquee tool here. Probably even use the shift key on my keyboard to produce kind of perfect selection here, and I can fill this with white. Probably I need to insert more reflections, so at least one more here, also filled, and one more probably. Deselecting, and then at some special places I'm going to add really plain white reflections. Probably I have a look in my brush presets. I have to activate the brush, of course, and I would look for kind of textures now. For instance, this one here, and set some really highlights. Well, this is of course a bit too harsh. I'm taking this back. Probably with a bit downscaled opacity and a 50% flow here, right? Yes, that looks nice. So that means really exposed areas might get some, this was a bit too harsh, some extra highlights. Also probably here the upper lips, also too harsh, and so on. So go ahead and add some highlights to your drawing. The finished highlights layer now also contains some textures in various colors here to produce an even more plastic effect on the frog itself. So we are finished here, but I still need to take care a bit of the background. It's still looking quite flat, and I will enhance the feeling of the background by using the same method as I described before. So on top of the background I'm inserting another layer, and this is called, I call this backlights, and I will set this to screen. And I will include another layer right down below here and call this back shadows. Shadows. No, shadows. And you guessed it, this is set to multiply. And then you would work on those two layers with texture brushes and air brushes to evoke the feeling of light and shadow, of course, in the first place, but also that the frog is kind of placed, or that it's sitting on a grassy surface. The final result, a candy-colored frog. Now you should be able to produce your own amazing bitmap illustrations from scan over line art to the final fully colored result. I hope you have enjoyed this series of illustration tutorials, and I'm looking forward to see you right back here on section Q. So long.